The Hamas terror attack in Israel on the 7th of October involved not just the murder of over 1,200 people and the taking of over 200 hostages, but also filming and sharing video of those horrific events. And since then, Hamas's armed wing, the Al Qassam Brigades, has threatened to release video of hostages being executed. The 2019 Christchurch terror attacks highlighted limitations on measures in place to prevent extremist violence from being live streamed and shared through social media. So, what does the Hamas attack tell us about whether things have improved much since Christchurch and what's being done by the big tech companies, regulators, and others to deal with the problem? Tech Against Terrorism is a public private partnership launched by the UN in 2017 to disrupt violent extremist use of the internet. Its executive director is Adam Hadley. Adam, welcome to RN.
Hi, Gillian.
Adam, Wired magazine recently reported that multi-billion-dollar tech companies are reliant on Tech Against Terrorism to alert them when new content from Hamas and other organizations is posted online. Is that right?
Well, yes, it is. And the reason is that the terrorist use of the internet is fragmented, covers hundreds of platforms. And this, in practice, is very difficult for tech platforms of big tech to monitor on their own. So we work with big tech and smaller platforms to support them in identifying and verifying terrorist content and doing our bit to ensure that we disrupt the terrorist use of the internet as a result.
Why is it so hard for the big tech companies to detect this sort of content on their own platform?
This really is a matter of prevalence. Back in 2017, the issue was that ISIS had a very large prevalence of content on the large platforms. So that's the percentage of content or users. That prevalence has dropped significantly, but in absolute terms, there's still quite a bit of activity on these larger platforms. However, terrorists are adept at adapting their techniques. And what we find now is that terrorists, and we're talking about designated terrorist organizations here, attempt to obscure the content on larger platforms or their activity. So this often requires something called network analysis to understand where this content is being shared on smaller platforms and to follow the breadcrumbs onto the larger platforms themselves. So in summary, large platforms have fairly sophisticated automated technology which captures the vast majority of content, but some will still creep through. The real problem here is that small platforms still find it difficult to remove really obvious examples of official terrorist content. And what we're finding at the moment is the vast majority of material being generated by Hamas, which of course is a designated terrorist organization, is being shared on one messaging app in particular. And from there, this content spans out onto all of the other platforms that we're working with.
And I think that platform is Telegram. Is that right?
That's right.
So, why is Telegram the preferred platform of an organization like Hamas?
Well, terrorists are certainly adept at using technology. They also are time poor and they want to use platforms where they know their content and material is going to stay up for the longest. So it's a kind of experimentation, trial and error. And by trial and error, what we're seeing is that some material is taken down quickly on some platforms, and on others, it stays up. You'd have to ask Telegram why they haven't taken action against these designated terrorist organizations. That is up to them. And it's also down to regulators and law enforcement to ensure that regulation is appropriate. And where there is regulation and legislation, that the police investigate and prosecute. Certainly, we believe that regulation in this area is essential. Terrorist content is dangerous and it is illegal in many jurisdictions, including in Australia. Often, what we find, though, is that the police don't have the resources required to do that investigation. And sometimes the political will is lacking as well to hold platforms to account where there are serious and consistent violations of terms of service. And this content will radicalize terrorists in our countries. This is not just a Middle Eastern problem. This content is being funneled to people with a potential radicalization in the UK, in Australia, in New Zealand. Anyone can view it. In the UK, the Director General of MI5 has said this very clearly, that the conflict in the Middle East is highly likely to increase the chances of terrorist attacks. But to be clear, big tech, they've improved. And what we're seeing now is that quite a lot of official Hamas material is being removed automatically, which is great to see. But it only takes one platform, one renegade app, and it can impact the entire ecosystem as a result.
On Sunday Extra, we're speaking with Adam Hadley, Executive Director of Tech Against Terrorism. And Adam, you're pretty clear there that things have improved. So if you were to compare, say, what happened in terms of media distribution after Christchurch to what happened with the Hamas attacks on the 7th of October, how much better was it? How widely was the Hamas attack distributed?
Videos and imagery relating to the Hamas attack are several orders of magnitude greater in volume.
Right.
And and that's the main challenge.
Because
That
there were so
we
many
are
attackers compared to one attacker in
so many,
Christchurch.
and also footage recorded by bystanders and
Mm,
by others. And what we're really seeing in this conflict is an example of violent material being used for political purposes by a terrorist organization and by others. Our focus at Tech Against Terrorism is primarily on officially branded terrorist content
mm,
because that's where there's consensus. But we also have to recognize that violent imagery is itself of concern when it can be used to incite or encourage violence. And what we are seeing here is the weaponization of this violent material by many actors, not just Hamas. And that is also concerning because who benefits from sharing violent imagery?
indeed,
Our
yeah.
concern is this violent imagery itself is likely to fan the flames of war and of conflict. But of course, we recognize it's essential that journalists and others are able to record incidents, hold those to account, and ensure that the truth is being shared. But at the same time, we need balance here to ensure that this material itself isn't being used to increase the violence of the conflict as we are currently seeing.
Mm.
And your initial question was about Hamas threats to release videos of beheading. We haven't really seen much of this yet. However, things can change very quickly. And certainly regarding the Christchurch attack, what we saw there was a relatively small amount of content that was spread extremely quickly across the internet, specifically a video recording of that live streaming. And that caught platforms off guard. What we're seeing now, thankfully, is a better response. However, we're talking about thousands of examples of content, not just one. So it's not viral in the same way. The challenge we have now is that this content is pretty much ubiquitous and being shared by news organizations. So, how are we to deal with this? We know that the automated technology that big tech has developed is working, but there is a broader question for us in society, which is about the extent to which this violent imagery is something that we believe should be shared for evidential purposes or to understand more about the conflict, versus trying to minimize this because actually terrorists use the internet with strategic intent. The communications that Hamas are putting out are deliberate.
Mm.
They are designed to influence global opinion. And what we are seeing here through terrorist content is the intent of a terrorist organization to manipulate and influence and exploit public opinion. And I would imagine that is what they're going to attempt to do over the coming days, weeks, and months. So terrorist content is going to be material to the conflict
Mm.
because it's going to be used by them to influence public opinion. And we know, of course, in modern warfare, public opinion, international public opinion, is central.
Adam, you told us that Tech Against Terrorism has an alerting process to assist a range of platforms. Could you tell us a little bit about what those processes are for Tech Against Terrorism and also what this group, the Global Internet Forum to Counter Terrorism, does in situations like this?
At Tech Against Terrorism, we focus on officially designated terrorist organizations. And the reason for this is because we don't want to be creating new norms. We want to be upholding the rule of law and ensuring that human rights and freedom of expression are being protected. Because we know in dictatorships that terrorism or the
The allegation, yeah,
accusation
exactly.
can be used to quash political dissent. We don't want any part of that. We want to focus on the consensus. And Hamas, and in particular, Qassam brigades and others, are about as designated as you can get globally. There are some countries that don't, but the vast majority of major democracies and international organizations do. So that's where we focus on those designated groups. And what we do is we try to find the source of this material on the internet. And we monitor this. And we have tools that monitor the sources of this material. And then as soon as it's shared more broadly, we then alert the platforms that are being used to host that material to this. The crucial thing here is that people in Tech Against Terrorism, our analysts verify this material. We have various tools to ensure that we're reporting content that really is connected to a designated organization. And then we monitor the extent to which platforms remove this. And we have a tool called the Terrorist Content Analytics Platform, the TCAP, mainly funded by the Canadian government, to share these alerts. We also archive this material and we add it to a database so that other platforms can remove this material should they wish in the future. So this is extraordinarily effective. And we find around 90% of the material we refer to platforms, obviously on a voluntary basis, is removed. In addition to this, New Zealand has some pretty interesting regulation because in New Zealand, they designate specific pieces of content if it's related to a terrorist attack. And when that happens in New Zealand, we then include that content, for example, the type shared in the Christchurch attack, and then we alert that as well. So it's actually unusual. New Zealand is the only major democracy in the world that has this sort of approach.
Mm.
And it's very helpful for us because we want to go to platforms big and small and say, hey, you've got to remove this material. It's connected to a designated terrorist organization. And that means that we can credibly go to a platform with legal justification in asking them to remove the material. So that's a large part of what we do. We also work with platforms to support them because this isn't just about telling them what to do. This is about providing resources and capability so that they understand the nuance of this because it's a complex and controversial issue in some cases. So that's what we do. We aim to disrupt this activity. The Global Internet Forum to Counterterrorism is an industry-led initiative founded by big tech, and their kind of forum of platforms really aiming to share best practice and providing resources amongst one another. And we support the GIFCT in a mentorship service with platforms. So if a platform wants to become part of this forum, we're there to support that platform and ensure that they have the adequate processes and systems in terms of removing terrorist content.
Since Elon Musk took over Twitter, now known as X, it's somewhat notoriously had a more permissive approach to content regulation, to say the least. Was the organization formerly known as Twitter materially worse in the restriction of Hamas content on and after 7 October?
Well, we have to be careful how we respond to this because some tech platforms respond quite badly to public criticism.
I'm sure Elon
Really,
Musk would never respond badly to criticism.
well, I couldn't comment on that, but I have to speak carefully because, of course, big companies and billionaires have big bank accounts to pay lawyers. What I would say is that it's pretty easy to see how platforms are responding to this content because in many cases it's so easy to stumble across. And I'd say the big tech, Meta, Google, and so on, are doing a great job of this. And it's very hard to find this material. I mean, you can do if you're dedicated. I mean, that's the same with everything on the internet, right? What we're really focusing on is stopping people come across this material by accident and trying to ensure that terrorists don't think they can run amok on platforms. Where Twitter is concerned, well, in the first few days of the conflict, we were really concerned. I think one of the challenges, because there's so much material on Telegram, it's very easy for it to be shared from Telegram and then shared elsewhere.
Mm.
And then there are genuine kind of like quasi editorial conundrums as well. So, for instance, the Hamas video that showed the release of a few hostages, is that news coverage? Should that be shown? Instagram seemingly are automatically removing examples of that video because it is actually terrorist content.
Mm.
But there are examples of broadcaster in the UK, Channel 4, putting that out as a news article, and then individuals resharing it on Instagram and Instagram taking it down. And you can kind of see why, right? This is not a criticism, but it just goes to show the complexity of this. So the point here is that where there is news value, there's no real consensus about what to do about this material. So when you have Hamas producing a propaganda video, let's be very clear about this, in order to influence public opinion, the question is, to what extent should this be shared and by whom? And we're not really sure what the right answer to this is.
One of the criticisms, certainly, say from Magazine and some of the commentators cited in that, is a sort of lack of transparency from big tech about what measures they take. But I understand that there may also be a security imperative to some of that lack of transparency. Could you explain that for us?
Well, there are two parts to this. Firstly, transparency, we believe, is really important. What that means is governments and platforms finding a way to explain what they are and are not doing.
Mm,
And the reason for this mainly is to support trust in the processes. It's not to be able to kind of analyze to the nth degree what's happening, but just to know that the right things are happening. And this can work in both ways. When platforms are doing a great job, they probably need to say more about this. What are they removing? Big platforms are quite secretive by nature because of there's a lot of very valuable intellectual property and all these sorts of things. So their nature is to be quite secretive, and they don't like talking about these sorts of things. And there are some big successes that they don't talk about in terms of removing material, but also it's hard to know what they're doing on many occasions. So transparency is really important. But to your point about the specifics of operations, at Tech Against Terrorism, we have to be very careful. We are busy taking down terrorist websites. We're busy taking down terrorist networks online. We rarely tell anyone about it because if we did, the terrorists would find out. They'd know it was us. Not only would we then become a target, but also they'd change what they were doing.
mm.
So there has to be a balance here because you know what? Terrorists may well be listening to this show. So we need to be very careful about what we say because terrorists, like the rest of us, absorb media, right? They listen to radio shows, they read newspapers, they do research. So it's very important when we're discussing this issue that we get the balance right between sharing enough information to build trust and confidence that tech platforms and others are doing a good job, but also ensuring that we're not giving away the secrets that terrorists can use to subvert like intelligence work, right? You don't want your adversary to know what you're doing. But at the same time, you also want to reassure the public and policymakers and regulators that you're taking this seriously. And that, again, is a difficult balance to strike on many occasions. But we do think there is more scope for transparency from platforms about what they're doing, what they're not doing, and also from governments, because it's imperative that governments are upholding their own laws. And as I said earlier, this is as much about ensuring if there is a crime online that this is prosecuted, which tends not to happen, is as much about that as it is ensuring that platforms are held to account based on the laws that have been put into place.
Adam Hadley, thank you so much for speaking with us on RN.
Thanks very much for having me on the show today.
Adam Hadley is the Executive Director of Tech Against Terrorism.
Find more great ABC RN stories that take you beyond the headlines on the ABC Listen app.